Hello, hello, it's Lance Osborne, and you are watching the Fab 4 Archivist channel. This is Beatles News. This is episode 15. I can't believe I've done 14 of these, but they were very, very different than this one, number 15. The other 14, kind of pre-recorded, kind of produced. This one is episode number 15. It's live, it's freeform. I was just hanging out in the chat room with, I think, almost 100 folks. So that's great. They're all watching this live right now, but I'm going to hit pause on the chat stuff and dig into the news. I've got 3 big stories plus one more little story that's kind of related to one of them that we're going to talk about. But because I'm doing this live, it's a little bit less produced. So if I flub over my words or if I don't have the right graphics or whatever, let's roll with it. So here we go. Let's jump in. I've got, like I said, 3 big stories. The first one is this one right here. It's a Let It Be project update. This one is coming from showbiz411.com, and that, of course, is run by Roger Freeman, who has done kind of celebrity news, tabloid news, that kind of thing for a long time, but he's legit, a super legit industry insider, legendary guy. He posted a story a few days ago, and it's this one right here. I highly recommend checking it out. This guy knows what he's talking about. This reporting is on a rumor about release dates for the new Let It Be project that we've talked about. As you guys know, Let It Be was not only a song, it was not only an album, it was also a film that came out. Its release date was May of 1970. That has not been formally released for like home video. It's certainly not on streaming. That hasn't been out since the days of Laserdisc. So now here we go. We're coming up on the 50th anniversary, and everybody has been waiting with bated breath because we haven't heard anything from the Beatles folks yet about a reissue, a re-release of the film. And so we were all kind of hoping / expecting something to come out in May, but Roger Freeman says that there won't be anything timed with the 50th anniversary release, which, like I said, would happen in May. Friedman expects everything to come out in the fall, and this capitalizes on holiday sales. So I talked about this in a video, and it's this one right here. And I talked about how a preview of the new Let It Be documentary that's made by Peter Jackson was shown at it was an Insider Grammys event that happened in January. So everybody was thinking, okay, maybe this is happening. Maybe this is kind of coming up on deck. Well, it turns out Roger Freeman and a few others are saying, yeah, probably not. And so a few others, by that I mean people with inside connections. I even heard from a couple of folks in the days after I posted that video that I'm talking about here. And they said that Let It Be, the film, wasn't quite ready for a release in the first half of this year. This was due to a number of reasons, including unsettled details such as the distribution of not only the original film, but Peter Jackson's new documentary about this era of the band as well. We can also expect an album package, but as Roger Freeman says here, it sounds like Giles Martin is currently working on it, as he did work on the White Album and the Sgt. Pepper re-releases, but it's not ready yet. So Freeman's report definitely squares with what I heard from others, so we're going to have to see what actually happens. As Freeman says, hey, we've waited this long, another few months won't hurt anybody. Got to agree with that one. So anyway, be on the lookout for more info here on my Beatles news segments. Sometimes I also share this stuff on my Facebook page. You can go check that out at facebook.com/Fab4Archivist. All right, next up, story number 2. You guys know this guy? Alan Alda. Paul McCartney appears on an episode of Alan Alda's Clear and Vivid podcast that was just released today. Alda, as seen here, is probably best known for his role on MASH, the TV show that was just huge, epic, and everywhere. The character he played was Hawkeye Pierce. To be honest, this is a little bit before my time, but I would imagine that most people in my audience either have heard of MASH or actually know this guy, know this show pretty intimately. But his podcast is related to his business. His business is all focused on interpersonal communication, business communication, and that kind of improvement training. So as part of this, like I said, the podcast is really related to it. Paul showed up on his podcast. So here's where Alan tweeted about it just today. Again, as the time that I'm recording this is March 3rd. So it was just released today. Kind of big news, kind of a big deal right now. McCartney's appearance is about an hour long, and I was looking through the transcript. We'll take a peek at that here in a second. And it looks like he was with Alda for the recording in late 2019. So it's a few months old, but in the terms of Beatles stories or just general Paul McCartney stories, that's not too old. There are a few interesting tidbits here, and of course it's along the typical stories like the creation of the song Yesterday, but I specifically enjoyed McCartney's breakdown of songwriting in general. Check this out. Paul says, "You've got to remember, we didn't really learn music in the Beatles. John and I, neither of us, could read or write music. Same with George and Ringo. I was talking to a friend of mine," which, by the way, this is me not quoting Paul. This is me dropping this in there. Paul's going, "A friend of mine who's in the band ELO, Jeff Lynne." Jeff Lynne, a friend of his in the band ELO. It's just funny how kind of off the cuff, how casual he mentions Jeff Lynne. Which, by the way, a simple plug for my two videos on Jeff Lynne and ELO and the connections between Jeff and the Beatles. Go check those out. So anyway, Paul's mentioning, I was talking to Jeff about this. He's from Birmingham. He says, "Well, we just made it up, didn't we?" He's a bit like my dad, says Paul. "We just made it up." And that is exactly what we did. So Paul continues, "So in writing songs, we looked at what everyone else did, which was A, A, B, A, A. Maybe something else, maybe a little riff or something." And side note, this is Lance speaking again. A, A, B, A, A, talking about the form of music. Some musicologists would be able to better analyze and explain this, but generally when you're looking at the verse, chorus, bridge, chorus, verse, I mean, those things have different letters, so that's where all that stuff is associated with. B usually being the bridge. Anyway, Paul continues, and that's how we wrote them. But then as you got on a bit, you started to try and do something different as you got in the middle of a song. Say you wanted to just, what the Beatles used to do at the end of a song, we just go somewhere else for a laugh. That's it. You've heard the song, and then it just goes off somewhere else. Oh, this is good. So anyway, that bit, let's see, the time code in the transcript says it's at about 18 minutes in. Like I said, the podcast is about an hour long, so it's probably worth your time. But yeah, go check that out. It's right here. You can find it on Apple Podcast or anywhere where you can get podcasts, or it's here on aldacommunicationtraining.com. So it's actually listed there. You can hit that play button and play the whole thing. All right, we're going to move on to our third story. Somebody actually asked me in the chat room if we're going to be talking about this one, and the answer is yes. Antiques Roadshow and the $500,000 Beatles guitar. So this is pretty interesting. It's an oddball prototype fretless electric guitar that was appraised by Antiques Roadshow. We'll talk about maybe its genesis here in a second, but I've got to point out, usually when you're talking about Beatles guitars, you're talking about Rickenbacker, you're talking about Gretsch, you're talking about George's SG, you're talking about the Casino, you're talking about some of those kind of iconic Beatles guitars. You're not talking about this one. This one is from Bartels of California, and apparently was once owned by both John Lennon and George Harrison. And so this guy, Ray, brought in this instrument to the TV show Antiques Roadshow, which if you don't know what that's about, you can go check it out. You probably know, though. Man, it's been on the air for 20 years. It's got to be. And so this gentleman brought in the guitar and said he worked with George on recording sessions for a film that was happening later in George Harrison's career. And the article says the sessions were for a film company that George co-founded, which I'm guessing this would be Handmade Films, and we all know some backstory on that one. But anyway, back to the guitar. It apparently is so rare, so unique, and it was appraised for 400,000 pounds, or in US dollars, just over $500,000. So it's really interesting to see something like this that has, and maybe somebody can correct me if you do, or if you can, drop it down in the comments or here in the live chat and let me know more about Bartels. I'm not familiar with it. Of course, I'm familiar with guitar makers besides just Fender and Gibson, but Bartels is not one that I'm aware of. So it's interesting that this one has apparently such high value just because of the lineage, not necessarily because of the brand or its further impact on rock and roll, like I said, for Rickenbacker. Sometimes I drop in a Rickenbacker in there, and that's because I think that's how Tom Petty pronounced it at the end of his Christmas song. Anyway, we are going to do one last little story this time around, switching over to the one and only Beatles Bible, which of course is a great resource for any Beatles fans. I'm sure you're familiar with it as a Beatles fan. But let's talk about what was going on in the band's career on this day in 1967. Again, today's March 3rd, so we're turning back the clock to 1967. The Beatles were hard at work on Sgt. Pepper, actually overdubbing the French horn parts onto the title track. I noticed this quote, thought it was really interesting and a nice kind of throwback to Paul McCartney's description of songwriting from that Alan Alda podcast. One of the 4 horn players that played on the track was Mr. John Burden, and he's quoted in recording sessions as Beatles Bible lists here. He says, "They didn't really know what they wanted. I wrote out phrases for them based on what Paul McCartney was humming to us and George Martin. All 4 Beatles were there, but only Paul took an active interest in our overdub." Sounds typical for Paul at this time. That's just my opinion. But I do have to wonder how session players get their musical notes from Paul at this point in his career. Is he writing this stuff out? Because we know with the Liverpool Oratorio and Standing Stone and this kind of classical work, he's familiar with the creation of music and notation in a way that he wasn't when he was in the Beatles. But what does that look like? Is he just humming licks to his guitarist? Is he humming licks to, any French horn player that's going to play on his next record? So it just is pretty interesting to me. And I just wanted to point all that stuff out. But this is it for the news. Like I said, this was Beatles News episode 15. I'm going to stick around a little bit for the folks that are here in the chat room, and I'll probably leave this bit on playback. So the news is over at this point, but like I said, the chat, sometimes those get really interesting. If I don't leave it off, it's because it wasn't interesting, or maybe everybody abandoned me here in the chat room. Who knows? But anyway, if that's here, feel free to keep on watching. But like I said, that's the end of Beatles News for this one. Done live, done kind of weird for me. But it's fun to kind of go outside your comfort zones a little bit. So anyway, that's it. Thank you so much for watching, and a huge shout out to my supporters on Patreon for helping make this channel happen, making it come to life. Couldn't do it without you guys. It means a whole lot to me. So Matthew, Russell, thank you so much, guys. Hopefully you can join me in a live chat sometime. All right, that's it. Thanks for watching. On to the live chat. Or let's return to the live chat, and let's return to another drink. That was what? 10 minutes? 12 minutes? I never really watch the time on that except when I'm actually recording these and then editing them later on. Sometimes I get a wild hair, and what I think is going to take me 3 minutes takes me 13. So I don't have a clue if that's what happened here. But give me a second. I'm going to pop through the live chat, see what's going on, and see if you guys have any questions or if I can dig into some of this new stuff a little bit more. Let's see, because of that, I'm going to bump up the music a little bit. Y'all tell me if that's too loud or if my mic's too loud, too low. I'm relying on you guys. I probably should or could be monitoring this with headphones. Just don't really want to. So going back to the favorite album discussion that was happening a little bit, Rocco Walsh says, got the White Album 50th on vinyl last year. Incredible. Love the Easter demos. I found that pretty interesting. The White Album on vinyl, not so much, but the Easter demos. Somebody from Analog Planet or some audiophile or some vinyl nerd would have to school me on this a little bit more. My video, so I did a video on the Escher demos, and I still get comments probably weekly where somebody goes, "It's Escher, not Escher." Trust me, I did the homework. I looked around. Some people say Escher. Giles Martin, son of George Martin. By the way, if you hear rattling around, that's my dog. That is my 13-year-old golden retriever who is 6 inches behind me. For like bigger videos, I'll kick her out just because that's kind of distracting. For a little news video like this, sorry about it. The 13-year-old dog takes precedence. Anyway, Giles Martin, son of George Martin, who has worked on all these projects. There's a clip around here somewhere of Giles talking about producing the Escher demos. And he says over and over, Escher, Escher, Escher. So if Giles is wrong, I'm going to go down with Giles, and I'll just be wrong with him. So for years I said Escher, but as soon as I heard Giles say Escher, I was like, all right, it's Escher from now on. Anyway, production notes aside, pronunciation notes aside, I am curious about what the Escher demos would sound like on vinyl, because I'm guessing from the analog tape, it would have gone through all the digital processing, pretty much like anything. I'm aware of the way that the mono masters for vinyl were done versus the stereo remasters pressed to vinyl, 2009. I'm familiar with that enough anyway, but I wonder if the Escher demos were any different. So if anybody can speak to that, if you're watching after the fact, drop it down in the comments, or if you're watching now live, let's talk about it a little bit more. Tiago at one point said, do you think the mono box and vinyl will get a reissue? Is that in short supply? I'm sure it was a limited run, like most of that stuff is. But was it actually limited? I don't know. And unfortunately, I don't have it. Walter says, we're doing it live. Yeah, we did it live, man. I have no clue how it turned out, but should be all right. Katie TLC says, hello and goodbye. That's another name that I'm familiar with here in the chat room. So Katie or Caddy, good to see you. Glad you're here. Let's see here. I just got a crazy comment that I will not push into the chat. It's completely inappropriate, but distracted me for a second. Let's see. So this must have been when I was talking about the Let It Be thing. So yes, CJ asked about 2 films. So yes, 2 films. The Let It Be film, the actual film, right, of the Beatles, was released in May of 1970. For some reason, and I can't explain why this hasn't been taken down, but for some reason, the entire film is on archive.org, which archives all kinds of stuff. Podcasts, videos, web pages, all that stuff. But the entire film is there. If you have not seen it, go watch it. But the second film that we're talking about, as I explained in the news video a little bit, is it's a documentary being pieced together by Peter Jackson. Peter Jackson, by the way, did the Lord of the Rings trilogy, and most recently is probably best known for creating the World War I. I don't even want to call it a documentary. It's really a recreation, or it's a piecing together. It's They Shall Not Grow Old. So he took all this footage from the World War I era and time corrected it. And I believe in some cases, did he colorize it? And speed corrected the sound, added sound effects where necessary, all this stuff. Like just a technical genius. And I'm sure it was him and his team. But he was using all this archival footage to tell this new story that hadn't been created, which, hello, syncs perfectly with what the Beatles have in their archives of all this stuff. All the unreleased demos, outtakes, footage that we have seen or sometimes haven't seen, the Niagara reels, all that. Peter Jackson has apparently put together this amazing documentary that tells the story that we've seen in Let It Be. So we know that it's towards the end of the Beatles' career, but it tells it in a new and exciting way, and probably isn't as much of a downer as Michael Lindsay Hogg's Let It Be film. No offense to Michael Lindsay Hogg. I think he was working with what he had in the sense that he was trying to tell a story that may or may not have been there. So let's see what Peter Jackson can do 50 years later. So that's the second film. So the main Let It Be film, and then whatever Peter Jackson's project ends up being called. There is, and I've talked about this in previous Beatles news episodes, there is a Get Back book that appears to be official, and it does have a fall release date, which is kind of where some of the fall speculation date came from. And now with this Roger Friedman story, really kind of syncs up a little bit more. It really does kind of paint the picture that everything is happening in the fall at this point. But point being, that book, it looks like it's just called Get Back. So who knows, maybe the Peter Jackson film will be called Get Back, which is certainly an appropriate name considering the Beatles almost named the Let It Be album Get Back. So anytime I refer to it here on the channel, sometimes I'm like, it's Let It Be / Get Back. It's the Get Back project. It's the Let It Be project. We all know what we're talking about. It's the stuff that happened late 68 going into 69, certainly through January of 69. Mark says, I won't believe any Let It Be release is coming until I've seen it. We've been teased for decades. Amen. I completely agree. I remember hearing this stuff years ago. It did see a Laserdisc release. It did see an official VHS release, but that was early 80s. So, I mean, I don't know what the final print date on the VHS tapes would have been, but I'm guessing 85, 86, something like that. It never saw an official DVD. All right, looks like we're back in action. I'm not sure what that hiccup was all about. I don't know if it was just on the receiving end or if it was on the sending end, but here we go. This is the benefit of doing it live, right? All right. So yeah, we were getting back into the Alan Alda story, the MASH story. My dad is close with Klinger, Jamie Farr. They grew up together. It's amazing. It's not quite Paul McCartney, but man, it's not too far off, right? Especially with the Alan Alda connection now. Walter asks, just I guess personally, do you have a background in broadcast or any video production, or is this just a hobby? Believe it or not, I do. Kind of more on the sales and the marketing side, a little bit on the technical side, but it interests me. You know, I've got my degree in stuff like this, took audio video production classes in college back in the day. So now it's fun to just do it without having to worry about it too much professionally. I mean, if my stream bails on me, it's not the end of the world. It's not like I'm going to lose my job, right? You guys will just get mad at me a little bit, but I'm not going to flip out. Jay said hi. Hi, Jay. I think I've seen you in here before, too. Storytime says, do you use Google Alerts in your toolbox for finding Beatles info, news, etc.? I certainly do. That is one of them. Roger Stormo's Beatles News Briefs, which is, it's his nickname, WOGEW.blogspot.com. That is, it's not the like definitive Beatles news stuff, but when something comes out that's interesting, he'll not just give you the headline. He'll usually go in a little bit deeper. Kind of like what I try to do here. New stuff, it's just a little bit more surface level. So when Roger goes in next level, I try to always point folks back to him. So he's a huge resource. Steve Marinucci has been doing Beatles news for years and years and years. That's a big one. Breakfast with the Beatles, Chris Carter on Sirius XM. Of course, I found some stuff. I learned some stuff from there. So that's a big deal. All right. At this point, I'm going to hit pause, and I'm going to actually bump down to the end of the live chat to see if anybody else is saying, yeah, your stream's buffering like crazy. Because I'm checking every now and then, and it looks like my encoder is not sending out. There it is. I'm not sure why it's buffering like that. Are we back in action? Looks like there was a pretty bad hiccup there for a second. I saw it on 2 different parts, which is so weird. I've got decent internet here, but a sign of the times, perhaps. All right. Let's see if we can get back. I'm still seeing an error message, but I think we're in the clear now. Sorry, guys. This is the nature of it, right? So let's go back into... Oh, Jose. What's up, man? Jose Benito Martinez Jr. says, hello. Did you start at the top of the hour? I missed the news. I started at 8:30 Central, 9:30 Eastern, and it's currently 9:20 Central, 10:20 Eastern. So that's... I did the news probably 15 or 20 minutes in. But it's okay. I'll cut it. I'll post it. You can see it later. We're actually talking about a decent amount of that stuff right now, just as we kind of go through the chat and talk about different points of the new stuff that were included. Let's see. Mark, please God, let me live long enough to see the Let It Be films released. Yeah, especially if we end up seeing the technical improvements that I'm expecting, that I'm hoping for. Because, man, if you watch that film, and I think I've said this in one of the Beatles news videos, one of the, 13 or 14, I've said it fairly recently. If you watch the Let It Be film, even in like the most pristine, restored releases, gray market releases that are out there, the video just feels like a downer. It feels like everything is gray and overcast. And not that I want Peter Jackson or whoever's handling the restoration to essentially Photoshop in blue skies instead of gray skies for the rooftop gig. I'm not talking about that. But it just feels like the whole thing is kind of color balanced the wrong way. Maybe it's the white balance. Maybe it's, I don't know. So if there's any way that can improve that, I really hope so. Audio quality, I think, is fine. Considering we've never heard it on anything other than Laserdisc and DVD, or I'm sorry, Laserdisc and VHS for the most part. If you heard it in the theaters back in the day, I would love to know. But then again, I mean, your ears were 50 years younger then, right? So it's hard to kind of compensate for, what do you hear on archive.org? What do we hear in the anthology DVD set when they would clip out the Let It Be stuff? If you are really specifically interested in this and the restoration process, go Google Let It Be and then this guy's name, Ron Furmanek, Furmanek, and that will tell you a lot about what happened years ago when we thought this stuff was going to come out, and then it just dead ended. I'm not sure if that gentleman is involved now to this in any degree at this point. I doubt he is, but some of his notes, some of the stuff that came out years ago about his work on it, it sounds like it was going to be just amazing then. So if they've improved any kind of technical quality between then and now, game on. It's going to go crazy. Walter, again, points out Vinyl Rewind has a great video on the differences between all the pressings of Abbey Road. I love Vinyl Rewind. Again, that's one of those channels that's not specifically Beatles oriented, but if you're going to talk about vinyl records, of course you've got to cover the Beatles. Perry asks, Lance, when the Let It Be project is finally out, what do you think Apple will do next? Go back to the early albums? A Rubber Soul deluxe set maybe? Or a Beatles for Sale deluxe? Revolver is the obvious one to me. Now, I don't know about timing for like a 55th anniversary or anything like that. But it seems like the most obvious one in the canon. You get into some of the earlier stuff, and of course the Beatles, rocked the world with She Loves You and I Want to Hold Your Hand. But the album as a whole, not to us, not to Beatles fans, but like to the world, right? Nobody really started talking about them from an album standpoint until about Rubber Soul. So I think maybe we could see a Rubber Soul reissue, but some of that stuff also gets touchy about the Capitol world, right? So Rubber Soul was a different album here stateside than it was for certainly the UK. I don't know about the rest of the world, but now that we've had it standardized on CD since '87, Rubber Soul has been Rubber Soul. But if they were to make a deluxe edition, how do they do that? How do they weave those two together? Do they pull in some of the singles that were released around the time? I don't know. Revolver was also, quite the compilation, quite the difference, quite the variation there. Maybe not as much as Rubber Soul. But I think that one's a little bit more obvious that, of course, you go with the catalog. But anyway, to me, maybe it's just because I'm partial to Revolver and its perfection. But I think that's the obvious one that I can't believe they didn't have a 50th anniversary of. Of course they would do Sgt. Pepper. Of course they would do the White Album and Abbey Road. Obviously, right? Like, it's okay to skip Yellow Submarine, and they did, so that was okay. But Revolver, I'm really surprised that they didn't make that one happen. Historically, and this is really kind of getting in the weeds of some of the business stuff, but this is what I do on this channel, right? I'm reading a lot of books and a lot of articles, and I'm trying to keep tabs on Apple Corps, not just what happened in when Alan Klein came in and cleaned house and did all that stuff, but what happened with the transition between Neil Aspinall heading out and now Jeff Jones stepping in. He's a music industry guy and he stepped in. What did that overlap look like? There's not a lot of stuff out there, but anything that is out there, I feel like I just eat by the spoonful. If you look at the timing there, I think some of that is kind of on that transition. The reason that we didn't see some activity was probably that transition. Jeff Jones had to get to know the Beatles camp a little bit more. They had to get to know him. I'm not sure how much was on him for pushing that stuff versus the Beatles going, okay, just from a legacy standpoint, we're ready to get it out the door. But if you look at 66, 2016, 2015, maybe 2014, when they would have had to have started prepping maybe a 50th anniversary Revolver release, Jeff Jones hadn't been there quite so long. We've seen a lot of activity in the last few years. So again, whether it's legacy or that transition there, I don't know. So that's a long way of saying what's next. I don't know. I don't think we're going to see a 60th anniversary edition deluxe box set of Please Please Me. Not just because we don't have a slew of outtakes and that kind of thing, but also just because it wasn't, I don't think lightning is going to strike me down for this one, because it wasn't a monumental album the way that Sgt. Pepper was, or the way that the White Album was. I think Revolver fits that bill. Rubber Soul, you could make the argument. Some of the earlier stuff, though, it got kind of mishmashed, and especially when you look at the different countries and the way that the Beatles started caring about the album as a concept later on in their career in a way that they didn't earlier in their career, just because of youth, or I think it was probably just the culture at the time, right? Like nobody in 1963 was going, I'm going to make a concept album. That came later. All right, jumping back into the chat. That was a very interesting question, Perry. Thanks for listening to me blab on about it. Jose says, I believe it would be a lot better to start the live feed at the top or bottom of the hour. I know it can be difficult. Yeah, man, I did it when I could based on kids' bedtimes and my availability. I don't want this thing to run into midnight for people on the East Coast. So I just did it when I could, bud. Sorry, man. Davey asked if I like Rocky Raccoon. Of course I do. My kids love that one too. Anytime I play, so for the musicians in the chat room or anybody else watching later on, anytime I play an A minor 7th chord, the kids are like, you playing Rocky Raccoon, Dad? It's kind of funny. Day Tripper says, just joined you. Is the Let It Be CD going to be remixed? Sorry, you probably asked this question 20 minutes ago and I'm just now getting to you. There's no reason to believe that it wouldn't be. And I say that just because of, as I just discussed, the White Album stuff that we saw, the Sgt. Pepper stuff, obviously Abbey Road. There's no reason to believe that it wouldn't be, but I wouldn't expect a giant change. 2 reasons. One being the technology at that point. Like Let It Be was a little bit more of a pastiche because of the Phil Spector stuff. But from a technical perspective, it already sounded good in a way that maybe a record in 1965 didn't sound so good. So keep that in mind. Secondly, hang on, is the stream dropping again? Yeah, I guess this is part of going back, the live chat going back like 10, 20 minutes ago. When you guys are like, the stream dropped. I don't see it. Anyway, I was just saying the Phil Spector thing, right? And then the technical quality. And then the second part being Let It Be Naked has already come out. So if we're expecting some like landmark, blows your ears out of the water kind of thing, the way that I think some of us experienced with Sgt. Pepper, with the White Album, with maybe a little bit more kind of reimagining of things, I don't know that I would expect that with Let It Be, because we've already got Let It Be Naked, which granted, it was more of a stripped down acoustic kind of vibe that they very intentionally went for, not just a straight up remix of the proper album. But you got to admit, they took some liberties with the White Album. So I don't think that we're going to see like a giant sonic change, but I think they would remix it, maybe just to update it a little bit more. And to me, for the most part, not 100%, but for the most part, that's kind of what the Abbey Road remix ended up sounding like to my ears. Mark mentioned the Get Back Let It Be footage looked amazing in the anthologies. Been waiting for that quality since 95. Again, check out Ron Furmanek. Who knows, maybe somebody mentioned that in the chat, but go Google that name. Ron Furmanek, Let It Be. Abley House says, I made a video on the fretless guitar a few months ago. 4 prototypes were made, 1 to Lennon and 1 possibly Hendrix. Beatles may have used it on Happiness as a Warm Gun, Helter Skelter, and Jimmy on Watchtower. Holy cow! Dude, if you haven't, please drop a link in the chat to that. Sorry, again, because of the chat delay, I'm sorry if that was 10 or 20 minutes ago. If you're not here, somebody else drop a link in the chat. That is awesome. I will watch that immediately when I'm done with this. That is extremely exciting. Joseph Johnston with a kind comment. You have the best Beatle vids on YouTube. You're fixing a hole, buddy. Thanks, man. Appreciate it. I'm going to go ahead and jump down. Mark mentions the only secret Beatles album was made by Klaatu. Is that how you pronounce it? Another guy that I've chatted with a little bit, and if you haven't subscribed to his channel here on YouTube, is Polyphonic. His videos are absolutely ace. You know, sometimes it's, I think he did a video on Kendrick Lamar, which is not, you probably don't care about Kendrick Lamar if you're watching this. You may respect him, you might appreciate it, but it's probably not your thing, right? I know my audience at this point, and if I mention Kanye or Jay-Z or Kendrick Lamar, you guys are like, so no offense to those guys and no offense to you guys, but point being, Polyphonic covers that stuff. And I don't know if he's got a video on like Lizzo, but he probably could, and tell you some of her backstory. But then he'll go in and he'll have a video on Klaatu and tell you the story of that one. So it's funny that that's a hidden secret mystery Beatles album. All right, I'm going to fly on through here a little bit more. Manish says, please increase the volume. It's a little late. I don't want to blow out anybody's speakers, but I will bump it up a touch. Scary Boy asked, what about Magical Mystery Tour? I'm sure you mean the album. I would put that in a weird way. Bear with me for a second. I would put that, when you're talking about 50th anniversary releases, I would put that in the same camp as Yellow Submarine. You've got some great songs on there, right? But because of the nature of how it was released, so Yellow Submarine, side one, songs either that have been previous released, or a handful that were made specifically for the movie or came in around the same time, however you want to say it. Then side two, George Martin, for lack of a better term, filler, George Martin's orchestrations. Love them, they're great, but it's not the Beatles, right? Magical Mystery Tour was the same kind of thing. And so go do some homework on this. If you're unfamiliar with how some of that stuff came out, Magical Mystery Tour was released as an EP for the film with 7 songs. Somebody correct me on that if I'm wrong. With however many songs on the EP. It was not a full-blown album the way that we now understand it. Again, I mentioned this a few minutes ago. The 87 CD remasters, the Beatles standardized their catalog. So you had the 12 or 13 albums, depending on how they looked at it, plus Past Masters Volume 1 and 2, that comprised the entire catalog. So I have it around here somewhere. This is a video that I need to make. I want to tell the story of the 1987 CD box set. Not the most interesting thing in the world, except kind of going back to the standardization. I think it is interesting as it relates to Yellow Submarine and Magical Mystery Tour in particular, and then all the singles. So anyway, they released this giant box set in 87, and that covered all of the Beatles' official releases. Maybe a little asterisk there with a couple of remixes and oddballs and that kind of thing. Keep in mind, this was certainly pre-anthology too, right? So anyway, to answer your question about Magical Mystery Tour, do you expect a remix? Well, look at the songs that are on there. Strawberry Fields is a great example. You ended up with more Strawberry Fields stuff on Anthology and the Sgt. Pepper box set, because there was that talk of Strawberry Fields Forever and Penny Lane kind of being the proto-Pepper tunes, right? They almost ended up on Sgt. Pepper. They very well could have ended up on Sgt. Pepper. And that's one of those discussions, it's kind of like, who's better, the Beatles or the Stones? It's kind of ask yourself, what would Sgt. Pepper be like with Strawberry Fields and Penny Lane? It'd be a completely different album. And what songs would you pull off if you had to? So anyway, those songs, instead of appearing on Pepper, ended up appearing on the Magical Mystery Tour album, right? Which was I believe, the only U.S. release that was issued as the canon, the official Beatles release in 87 with the standardization of the catalog. Sorry, super complicated. That's kind of a long-winded answer. Point being, and I've used point being way too much tonight, kind of circling back. I don't think that we will see a Magical Mystery Tour remix anytime soon. Mainly because we've seen so much of that stuff appear already on things like the Sgt. Pepper box set. Then you've got outtakes. Now, what do you do with the songs that live exclusively there that could still be remixing? I don't know. I wouldn't be surprised if we do see remix projects later on that include that. Hang on one second. If you can hear me, it doesn't look like I'm pushing out. My encoder is not doing well tonight. Hey, and we're back. Man, getting frustrated tonight. I don't know what's going on. It does really well for the tech nerds out there. I'm pushing out about 4 megs up right now, which is great for live stream. But then it'll drop to like 200 kbps and and I get a red light and that's it. So anyway, back to the Beatles stuff. Let me wrap this one up quickly. Magical Mystery Tour. What would it look like if they remixed those songs, especially the songs that already have been remixed and exist elsewhere? Do we end up at some point with a Magical Mystery Tour EP remix? Like that would kind of harken back to, 50 years ago. I don't know. I don't know what that looks like. It's great food for thought. Great question to ask. Would we end up with a compilation at some point, kind of a la anthology, but instead of being, maybe it's a la Past Masters, right? Like it's the remixes for 2023, and then 2024 has a remix collection so that they can eventually say, hey, we've pushed all this stuff out there. So anyway, just something to think about when you start thinking, will they remix Magical Mystery Tour? Will they remix the Yellow Submarine album? Which I guess we've already seen with the song track, but just kind of keep that in mind. Guys, I'm going to start to wrap this one up. Sorry about the technical stuff over the last little bit. Yeah, see, my streamer is now saying excellent condition because I'm pushing out a huge amount of data. So I don't know. I'm definitely on my network connection. I don't know. I'm going to let it go. Not too worried about that one. Mark, great comment here. George Martin called pulling Strawberry Fields Forever and Penny Lane off of Sgt. Pepper the greatest mistake of his career. Yeah, I've heard that before. I don't know if that was definitive or if that was like somebody extrapolating that. But not that you can change anything in the past, right? I don't know if he would have any specific regrets there, but Strawberry Fields Forever, not appearing on Pepper, obviously worked out well. The double A-sided thing with it becoming not becoming number one, gets hairy, gets weird. Go look up Engelbert Humperdinck and play Release Me and think, did this really deserve to not let Strawberry Fields become number one? But still, I don't know. I think the lore now of it being coming out the way that it came out makes even more sense. I can't imagine it on Pepper. It would have worked, of course, but I don't know what I would trade. It's not like I would rather have When I'm 64 and Lovely Rita as an A-side, B-side kind of thing. I don't know. All right, ladies and gentlemen, guys, thanks for hanging out with me. This has been a lot of fun. Looks like my stream time is somewhere a little over an hour. That's what I figured. I figured we would go over about an hour. I think we've done 20-minute streams before, which are just kind of quick in and out. But by the time you start hanging out with folks and answering questions and learning about people a little bit, yeah, it goes on and on and on. So thanks for joining. Thanks for sticking around, especially the news part that was a little bit more kind of the core of the video, but I ignored you guys in the chat. Let's see, Mark, sorry, getting back to the chat real quick. No, George actually said that a few times. I'll have to do my homework on that. That's interesting. For some reason, the thought in my brain right now keeps on coming back to how hurt George Martin was when John said if I could re-record anything, it would be Strawberry Fields Forever. And George Martin was just heartbroken by it. So I'm kind of focused on that one right now in my brain. Guys, that's it. Thanks again. I don't know. I think I can stop the stream, but leave the chat room open if you guys want me to do that. Yeah, I'll do that. I'll push that out for a little bit. But I'm out. This has been fun. This has been great. Thank you so much for caring about this channel and the work that I do. It's a hobby, yeah, but it's a fun hobby to be able to kind of nerd out, geek out like this, and know that I'm not the only one who feels like this about this band. So I don't really care if 1 million people watch my videos or if 10 people watch my videos. It's really fun to dig into this stuff. And so when other folks appreciate it and want to join in the live stream or they want to comment on a video or whatever, it means a lot to me. Heartfelt. All right, we're out. I'm going to hit stop on the stream, kind of. We'll see what happens. All right, see y'all next time.